Boeing was dying. Airbus was winning. Now it's the opposite. Airbus just had its worst quarter in more than 20 years. Boeing just had its best quarter in almost a decade. Read that again, because it should not make sense. For the last 5 years, Boeing was the disaster. 2 crashes, a door that blew off mid-flight, billions of dollars burned every quarter. Airbus was the safe choice. It barely had to try. It just had to keep building planes while Boeing fell apart. That story is still what most people believe right now, today, and it is already out of date. Same industry, same 2 companies, the roles have quietly flipped. And the reason why has almost nothing to do with either company's planes. It's a single part buried inside one engine that almost nobody outside the industry has heard of. We'll get to exactly what it is. Let's be clear about what this is not. This is not a story where Boeing fixed everything and Airbus fell apart. Boeing still carries more than $50 billion in debt. Boeing still has aircraft models waiting on certification that was originally expected years ago. And Airbus still holds the larger order backlog and the larger share of the global narrow-body market. So if both companies still have real problems, why does this moment matter? Because it reveals something most people miss about corporate crises. The company that looks like it is losing is not always the one carrying the bigger risk. Sometimes, the real risk is hiding one level deeper inside a supplier, a production line, or a decision nobody outside the industry was watching. That is exactly what happened here. To understand the reversal, you need the setup first.
In March 2019, regulators grounded the Boeing 737 MAX worldwide after 2 crashes killed 346 people. The grounding lasted 20 months. Boeing never fully recovered its rhythm after that. Then in January 2024, a door panel blew out of an Alaska Airlines 737 MAX mid-flight. Nobody died, but the FAA responded by capping Boeing's production rate, and investigators found the same pattern investigators always dread: not one mistake, but a recurring systemic quality problem. Then came a machinist strike that shut down factories for weeks. By the end of 2024, Boeing had burned through $14.3 billion in cash in a single year. To avoid a credit downgrade to junk status, the company was forced into a massive capital raise just to stay stable. This was not a company having a bad quarter. This was a company that had lost control of its own production system. While Boeing was in freefall, Airbus did not need to be brilliant. It simply needed to keep building planes. By late 2025, the Airbus A320 family officially passed the Boeing 737 as the most delivered commercial jetliner in aviation history. Airbus built a commanding lead in the narrow-body market, the most profitable and most competitive segment in commercial aviation, the single-aisle planes that airlines use for the bulk of domestic and short-haul routes worldwide. Airlines that would normally split their orders between the 2 manufacturers increasingly lean toward Airbus simply because Airbus could actually deliver on time. For half a decade, the entire aviation industry operated on one assumption: Boeing is the risk, Airbus is the safe choice. That assumption shaped billions of dollars in airline fleet decisions. And it turns out that assumption was already starting to crack. In August 2024, Boeing brought in a new CEO, Kelly Ortberg, an outsider with an engineering background, not a finance background. His first major decision surprised almost everyone. Instead of racing to increase production and generate cash as fast as possible, Ortberg slowed things down. He deliberately capped 737 production at a lower, more controllable rate, prioritizing quality and consistency over speed. It looked cautious. Some analysts called it too slow. But the discipline started paying off. Operating margins in Boeing's commercial airplane division moved from deeply negative toward break-even. Cash burn fell from billions per quarter to a few hundred million. By mid-2025, production hit 38 aircraft per month. By early 2026, Boeing pushed past 40, on a path toward the low 50s by the end of the year. Slow, boring, methodical recovery. and boring is exactly what a company that nearly destroyed itself with speed needed. If you've made it this far, you're exactly who this channel is for. Subscribing helps me keep making these. No pressure, but I'd appreciate it. Now here's where it gets genuinely interesting. In the first quarter of 2026, Boeing delivered 143 commercial aircraft. Airbus delivered 114. That is a 29 aircraft gap in Boeing's favor. For context, it was Boeing's best first quarter for narrow-body delivery since 2018. For Airbus, it was its worst first quarter in more than 20 years. Let that sit for a moment. The company everyone wrote off as the industry's disaster just had its best quarter in almost a decade, and the company everyone assumed was untouchable just had its worst quarter in a generation. This is not a rounding error. This is a structural shift happening in real time. So what actually happened to Airbus? Remember the part we mentioned at the very start, the one buried inside a single engine that almost nobody outside the industry has heard of? Here it is. It was not a design flaw. It was not a safety scandal. It was not bad management. It was a supplier. A significant share of the Airbus A320neo fleet relies on engines from Pratt & Whitney using a geared turbofan design. Pratt & Whitney discovered a manufacturing defect in the metal powder used to forge critical engine components, creating a risk of cracking. The fix required pulling engines out of service for inspection and repair at a scale nobody was fully prepared for. By early 2026, roughly a third of the global A320neo fleet was sitting grounded or in storage, not because the planes were unsafe, but because they had no working engines to fly with. Turnaround time at maintenance centers stretched from around 60 days to more than 300. Airbus CEO Guillaume Faury put it bluntly to investors. The company has significant Pratt & Whitney engine shortages and called the situation, in his own words, unsatisfactory. Airbus's profits dropped 52%. Faury told the press the company was suffering. Airbus did not lose momentum because it forgot how to build planes. It lost momentum because one supplier, 3 tiers deep in its own supply chain, could not deliver a working part. This is the part most coverage misses. Everyone spent 5 years watching Boeing's story as a story about corporate culture, safety oversight, and internal discipline. That was a fair story to tell. Boeing's crisis really was self-inflicted. But Airbus's crisis reveals a different kind of risk entirely. A company can do almost everything right, design well, sell well, manage its balance sheet well, and still get taken down by a single external dependency it does not fully control. In a duopoly like commercial aviation, both companies look powerful from the outside. Massive backlogs, guaranteed demand for a decade, governments that will not allow either one to fail. But that same scale creates a strange kind of fragility. When you are building thousands of aircraft, a single supplier's manufacturing defect does not stay a supplier's problem. It becomes your problem multiplied across your entire fleet. Boeing's crisis was about what happens when a company loses control of its own culture.
Airbus's crisis is about what happens when a company depends on someone else's different failure. Same underlying truth. Being the biggest company in your industry does not mean you are the safest one. None of this means Boeing has won. Boeing still carries a debt load that limits its flexibility. And Airbus, despite the engine crisis, still holds a larger order backlog than Boeing, meaning airlines have not lost faith in the company long term. This is a duopoly. It is built to survive setbacks on both sides because no airline in the world can realistically walk away from either manufacturer. But for the first time in half a decade, the gap between the disaster and the winner has narrowed to almost nothing, and that should change how you read every headline about either company going forward. The label crisis company and the label safe choice are not permanent identities. They are temporary positions in a system that is always shifting underneath the surface. Boeing did not fix itself by being fast. It fixed itself by finally being disciplined. Airbus did not lose its edge by being careless. It lost momentum because of a single supplier problem hiding 3 layers down in its own production chain. The real corporate truth here is uncomfortable for both companies. Neither Boeing nor Airbus is actually in control of its own destiny. They are both hostages to their own complexity, their own suppliers, their own certification processes, and their own history. The company that looks strongest right now is usually just the one whose hidden risk has not surfaced yet. If you want to understand how giant companies really rise and fall, subscribe to Corporate Truth. This is where we explain how companies really work.